party, but subject to a historic preservation easement? Have you now accomplished the, historic preservation that appears to be an authorized use of the funds? That's the part that I'm not comfortable with.
When you talk about, I'm sorry, when you talk about open space funds, are you just talking about the municipal open space funds or the county as well?
I'm talking just about the funds that Princeton collects through its local open space tax.
Right. So in some of these cases, we know if it's affordable housing, we would lose the county.
You would lose the county if you were doing anything other than adding this property to the Mary Moss Playground, is my understanding, that the commitment from the county is solely to provide the money in order to expand the playground with this property and nothing else. But I'll let the mayor confirm that, because...
That's correct. The county's open space fund is more restrictive than the municipalities.
And just to confirm the numbers, we're looking at a purchase price somewhere in the neighborhood of $600,000, and the county funds would be approximately half of that.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Right. I asked, I'm sorry, if I may. There was just one thing that I did want to add. Again, to follow up on what Mr. DeShield was saying. The ordinance authorizes but does not compel the acquisition, and it authorizes the use of the open space funds to fund that acquisition. If you were, and what I should say is right now, you've commissioned 2 appraisals of the property. It's anticipated that the purchase price would be around $575,000. That's what's stated in the ordinance, but that's subject to the appraisals supporting that number. And what the ordinance does not do is, say conclusively, it doesn't give you the authority to enter into a purchase and sale agreement with Roman Barsky for a specific sum of money. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you were to adopt the ordinance, you would still need to get the appraisals, you would still need to negotiate a final purchase price with him, and as a council, you would have to take formal action to approve that final number, authorize the mayor to sign and enter into the contract. So the ordinance is not the final step. It's an initial step.
Thank you. Ms. Cromer?
So for the rehab costs, did you say $300,000? What are the estimated rehab costs?
I believe it was around $200,000.
200, and was that to convert it to one unit?
That would just simply be to rehab the unit.
As a single family?
Yes, and we've been through the unit. There's only one kitchen there right now, so it appears that's the way it's been functioning when it was previously in use, most recently.
And how many bedrooms is it? Do you know?
There's two. Can I ask one other question? I believe we received communication from the Affordable Housing Board that they considered this matter. Mr. DeShield, can you summarize what they told us?
There was an email that came late this afternoon, and my internet's not working, so I can't grab it. But I did forward it to council, so if anybody else can get on.
We do have it.
I know I have it printed out. Here it is. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, I can read it.
While you're, okay. Well, I was going to actually just ask Ms. Stockton if you could set up, because I know you have some pictures of the property too, and I think there's some interest in seeing the inside for people who haven't yet.
Procedural question. I know we had talked last time about making sure we're adequately notifying the community when we're having public hearings, and I think so many people are here, so obviously the word's gotten out, but it's still, as it's on the agenda, it's by the lot and block number, and it's not by the street address. So we had talked last time about not doing that again, and yet we did it. So I want to make sure going forward that we are more careful, I guess, about giving the street address. Sorry. But, it seems like the word got out, and a lot of people are here, but going forward, I don't even know my lot and block number, So I don't know if anybody knows it. Yeah, sorry.
I caught that tonight.
Sorry.
Do you want to summarize it? We've got it. I've got it. I can read it, or you can read it. We've got it.
We can summarize it.
Yeah, so
Christie?
You want us to read it?
Well, all right, it says, while standing by its commitment to maintain and increase the number of affordable units within the municipal affordable housing program, at this time, the board failed to reach a consensus regarding the purchase of the Lytle Street property to create an additional affordable unit. Board members have performed an exterior inspection of the property and are aware that the municipal staff has inspected the interior of the property. The information gathered so far indicates that the cost to procure the property, currently in the range of $600,000, and the unknown cost of an interior gut rehabilitation may well exceed funding available through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund at this time. Several board members support the concept but are not in a position to make the determination without the benefit of a cost analysis in order to make an informed decision. Several other board members do not support acquisition of the property for an affordable unit under any circumstances. Kind regards, Christie.
Are there any other questions from council at this point? And we can, yeah, Ms. Beller?
At our meeting last week, we had a rather free-ranging discussion of all the possibilities, but I wonder, whether, given what we've heard, we want to narrow the comments to what we consider to be our real viable options.
I don't think we can constrain. If we have a public hearing, I think that people are free to say whatever they want to say.
But nonetheless, I actually would like to say something before we start the public hearing.
Okay.
I sent a perhaps a little bit sharply worded note to some of the advocates who are pushing for using this property to historically preserve it and use it for affordable housing. And I did so because I fear the following outcome. I fear that by advocating for something which is fiscally outside of our ability to be able to deliver, we will end up with no outcome that benefits the community whatsoever. That the outcome will be that a council will end up taking no action because the only opinion we will hear, or the loudest opinion we will hear, will be for something that we consider not affordable. And the end result will be that instead of expanding the park, we will simply throw up our hands and allow Mr. Barsky to proceed with his own plans independently. I think that is the worst possible outcome, but I think that that is the direction we are headed with the tone of the discussion that we've heard up to this point. I certainly welcome input that suggests that there is funding available from other sources that have not been considered. I haven't seen any of that to date. So I'm trying to provide some guidance just for me as one individual council member in terms of what I'm considering. We made the initial proposal to acquire the property because we had the opportunity to do something that we thought was good for the neighborhood, which was to expand the park. We don't have the funds available to do what is being requested, which is to acquire the property, historically preserve it, and then turn it into affordable housing. That's my perspective given the fiscal constraints that have been given to us. The cost to acquire it for use as an expansion of the park is around $300,000. In terms of municipal funds, the cost to acquire the property and preserve it, the minimum we are talking about is getting into the neighborhood of $800,000, and it could go up from there if the estimates are low. The difference in funding matters. We don't have that funding in hand.
Ms. Grimmer?
Well, I'd like to add to that. I would like to, because I do feel we heard, in general, at the last meeting, almost unanimous opposition to the park. But what I would want to know is if we can't turn it into an and mostly people wanted us to preserve it and turn it into an affordable housing unit. But what I would like to know is if we can't do that, are you still opposed to the park, and would you want us to forego the sale, buying the house and allow the two houses that are likely to go up, the two new houses? So when you're making your comments, I would just kind of like to know, how you guys feel about that.
Are you ready? Okay.
And do we?
Okay. Ms. Howard?
Well, and then I guess I'm a little bit of in a quandary. We heard from a bunch of people, we've gotten a lot of emails from people, and a number that came in today from people with kids who are not able to come, we always struggle with getting community input, and it's particularly hard for people with kids to be able to come to a meeting, past bedtime. And so I don't know whether we should read those into the record, or, it would be nice to be able to get them into the record. I don't know what's appropriate there.
This is not a planning board hearing. I think that everybody on council got them, and so I would just,
that's fine. So then maybe just
normally
make the
we just
comment that
factor
we-
them into.
Yeah, maybe just make the comment that we did hear from a number of people who live in the neighborhood, and actually several people who grew up in the neighborhood and who commented that they would like to have a park for children to play in.
That's right. We
Right.
did hear that, and that was new information.
A park for children to play in.
We got several emails from people saying they wanted us to go ahead with the purchase that included raising the house and building a park.
And just to clarify, it's not building a new park, it's expanding on the neighboring Mary Moss Park.
Okay, I don't want to take too much more time on council because I want to hear from the public, but we do have a few pictures. Maybe we can just just have a really quick slideshow for a minute or two. Can they go up there? There we go.
When do you want to count the hour and 15 minutes?
Okay, why don't we start with public comment just to get this moving? Oh, nope, here we go.
Bob, how tall are you?
That's Bob Kaiser in the, one of the second-story bedrooms.
Yeah, so that was Mr. Kaiser in the second-story bedroom. So the second floor has very low ceilings, as you can see.
You're not standing on anything, so it's just, and how tall are you?
Are both bedrooms on the second floor?
Correct, that's looking out of the kitchen, I think, out the backyard.
Well, why don't we do the slideshow, because I just want to maximize the time for comment.
This is looking down into the basement area. And it's a rubble floor in the basement.
I'm sorry, are these last pictures the foundation? Is that what we're seeing?
This is within the basement, yes. This is another shot of one of the back porches.
He's standing on the
Stay on the floor.
Standing
On the floor. It's on the floor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and so now I'd like to open it up to public comment. There were 3 people who signed up initially, Kip Cherry, Daniel Harris, and Wendy Maker. So I'd like to call the 3 of you up, and then everybody else can line up behind. If we form the line, it seems to help move things along. Every once in a while, please look at Council President Miller, and he'll be holding up signs. And we do want to try to hear from everybody who'd like to speak tonight. Can you pass it over, Linda? Yes, go ahead, yes.
Okay, I'm Kip Cherry, 24 Dempsey Avenue. I've been working with the Witherspoon-Jackson Historic District Committee.
Can you speak into your mic?
Not on?
No, it is. You just have to speak right.
Oh, sorry. I've been working with the Witherspoon-Jackson Historic District Committee, and I don't know what's happened to the email, but you guys seem to have been missing the proposal from the Habitat for Humanity. How many of you were aware of the proposal from them? Okay. Okay, so...
But we just found, but that didn't include purchase price, right?
No, it only includes the rehabilitation, and we still have to figure out the acquisition component of it. And we would like to get the price reduced. Also, I just want to mention to you on the ceiling, that's irrelevant because the ceilings will be raised as part of the rehabilitation. So you shouldn't go by the condition of the building now. It'll be completely gut renovated. So I'm going to skip some of the preliminaries because I want to make sure we get to the most important stuff, which is the proposal from Habitat for Humanity. And I'm speaking on behalf of the Executive Director, Tom Caruso. He couldn't be here tonight for the very reason that we just reached agreement on this morning, so he didn't know he was going to need to come here. But he authorized me to speak on his behalf in terms of the interest of the Habitat for Humanity in this project. What they would be doing would be financing the rehabilitation and taking care of granting mortgages and handling the entire project. And they have already several properties in the area on Lee Street, and also the property right next door is a Habitat for Humanity's project. There are lots of advantages of going with the Habitat for Humanity's concept, including the fact that they would raise the money for the rehabilitation from private donors. They're okay about doing historic preservation at the level we've discussed with them. They don't do LEED, unfortunately, but for obvious reasons that would really increase the cost of the building, but they do Energy Star, and their standards are very high for energy conservation, and there's a possibility that we might be able to include solar in the project. With multiple units, they would create a condo association, so we're not talking about a building that would be leased, it would be sold, the units would be sold. We've been talking about 3 to 4 units. We don't know yet how many units can be fitted onto the site behind the house. So this would be done according to historic preservation standards. The current standards in the ordinance, it would involve the review of the Historic Preservation Commission. And certainly the Housing Board also would be very involved in what goes on within the building and within the lot. The units would go to families with incomes in the neighborhood of $65,000. Which is low and moderate income. The mortgages would be for 20 years at 0%, and the mortgages would be held by Habitat for Humanity. The mortgage payments would cover the mortgage, insurance, and taxes, plus the owners would be required to put in 300 hours of sweat labor, and 30% of their income would go towards paying their mortgages. All labor would be from volunteers, except for the work that has to be done by a licensed professional, such as electrical and plumbing, and possibly some of that could be donated. Habitat for Humanity is doing a project in Trenton right now in which the electrical work is being donated. They've just completed relatively recently a house that was rehabbed at $125,000 for the rehab, just to give you a feel. Of course, the more units you have, the larger the rehab expense, but at the same time, then, it's divided amongst all the units, so that lowers your price per unit total. This is all preliminary. Obviously, we just came to an understanding today. We would like to continue to work on the concept, both in terms of the design as well as the dollars. And we'd like to initiate meetings with the municipal administrator to go through the details of how to work all this out. They did have previous discussions with Bob Brusheye some little time ago in which they discussed some of their interest in doing work in Princeton. So this did not come totally as a shock to them. They were actually quite prepared and ready to go. Mr. Caruso has time to begin working on the documentation immediately. So, I mean, that's a big plus, because if he didn't have time, that would be a real problem. There would be, I think, historic preservation easement would be something we would like to see, and there might need to be some kind of a deed restriction or easement related to affordable housing. Christie would know better than that. That was actually the question I left for her in our voicemail. We don't know all the answers to that. As far as the acquisition is concerned, we feel that the historic preservation money in the open space fund could be used for that, but there are also some other strategies and alternatives that we would like to discuss. Because these units are going to be sold, it's possible that a bridge loan would serve the purpose because there will be money coming back in as the units are sold. I think that's enough for right now. I want to thank Mr. Barsky publicly for his patience at going through all this, and we think that we could have a really excellent project, very good for the town, very good for historic preservation, very good for the neighborhood. So thank you, and I'm glad to answer any questions, and I think there are a number of people from the neighborhood ready to speak about this.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I may? Actually, in response to the email that was sent around, I did have an opportunity to speak with the executive director of Habitat and to have a conversation. And based on the conversation I had with you, he was looking at the project as being the same type of project they normally deal with, which is just going in and doing a rehab. He did have some concerns with the additional costs, particularly if you're talking about adding units, because it's one unit. Based on his model of how they build houses, that would be a financial stretch for them to do that. They would need assistance in that area. In addition, he had some concerns with the historic preservation. Again, that would be a stretch. Usually what they do when they go into a property is just to do the basic rehab of the property. What you're asking for would extend that, so we still have a gap in terms of financing that would have to be done if they were to do that work. So he did have some concerns on how that would use. In addition, and I think the attorney may have an opinion on this. I'm not sure once you use the open space funds, whether we can then expand on a historic property using the open space funds. So that's an area, now that you bring up this issue, that may be another area that we have some concerns with.
Well, I would think, we do need some legal research. We don't know every answer. There would be an historic preservation easement. We might also need a deed restriction or historic easement related to affordable housing to make sure that if it's resold, it will remain as affordable housing. He was quite can-do when we were talking this morning about these different iterations. The historic preservation is not a problem. And as far as the other units, that's something that has to be discussed with an architect as to what more we could do. The reason that we proposed it was because with all this effort, we might as well get more units out of it if we can. Also, there is a housing authority property right behind it, and there's a shed that could be taken down. It would also reduce the unit cost if we have more units. So all of this is flexible. We do need to sit down and really discuss it. It's not something that we can solve tonight, but I think that where there's a will, there's a way, basically, and I think that this meets a lot of goals in the neighborhood in terms of affordable housing and in terms of historic preservation. And I should say that this building is about 150 years old. It's remarkably the same probably as it was originally, which is an opportunity for us. It may look pretty crummy, but to somebody in the historic preservation business, this is a very good-looking building because the original material is there, and that's why this building is so important in the heart of the neighborhood.
Thank you, Kip. Madam Mayor, members of council, members of staff who have worked very hard on this project so far, thank you. I would like to make a personal request to staff, actually a group request, that you share with us, both Mr. DeShield, the report that you just read, which would be very useful for us to have on your findings. And Ms. Cecil, if we may benefit also from the results of any research which you continue to do on this project as we look at the difficulties connected therewith, so that we can all be on an equal playing field. Madam Mayor, you were good enough to suggest in Princeton Magazine some while back, I'm sorry, Daniel Harris, 28 Dodds Lane, Princeton, New Jersey. You were good enough to suggest in Princeton Magazine perhaps a year ago that you were fortunate in having a community of activist citizens who did a lot of research. Well, we have done as much as we can in about a week's period, and we would ask you to share with us as a municipality research which you do, so that we are all able to move forward together. I'm cutting introductory remarks, which you have in front of you. Open space funding, first, and I'm sorry some of you did not receive the blanket email that many of us sent to all of you many times today. Sorry for the repetitions also, particularly you, Mr. Simon. First of all, open space funding can be used for purposes of historic designation. You all know this from documentation sent to you earlier today with citations from both Mercer County and from the Princeton Master Plan. Such funding, as Robert Van Zimbush will also say, if he speaks, has already been used for the historic Veblen House in Herrontown Woods. On this matter, please consult also the memorandum that Trishka Cecil prepared, page 3, and I will return to this matter. Mayor Lempert, you have questioned in an email to Kip Cherry earlier today, if we purchase the property with open space money, we are restricted in how the property can be used. Well, we're now exploring the nature of those restrictions, if any, and you go on with a question. For example, I'm not sure we have the option of turning the property over to Habitat. I will try to get clarity on this before tonight. We almost have some clarity, but we don't have a really bright picture. We also ask, and I mentioned this to you earlier today, also when, and I know you are dying also to know, may we have the dates on which the appraisals will be received?
I think we do have an answer for that. I'll interrupt you for a couple minutes. And I think by Easter, is that correct?
That is April 5th?
By Easter, we were supposed to have them?
That's a Sunday.
Okay.
We're expecting them within the next week and a half.
With next week and a half, yeah.
I'm sorry?
Within the next week and a half.
Within the next week and a half.
Week and a half, okay. 10 days. Okay, thank you very much for that. We take note. The citizens group, loose as it is, has been in close touch, and we do believe that Roman Barsky needs to be informed of the work Habitat for Humanity intends to do. The citizens group has made a date to meet with Mr. Barsky this coming Thursday. It is certain that Mr. Barsky continues to hold many, if not all, the cards, and it is in our best interests to make him an ally, to include him as an interested party in further discussions. We generally appeal now, as always, to his good word and his honor not to retract his commitment to sell the property to Princeton. But Princeton has some significant issues, including legal issues as well as financial, to determine and should not be entirely rushed on a matter which involves the potential gain of 3, if not more, affordable housing units, assuming an addition to the existing structure. Mr. Barsky should not be left afloat wondering what the people on shore are thinking about. I should add here that while there may be Bernie, you're rough tonight. Habitat has been approached. Isles has not yet been approached. They are on our radar. We have had only some time to work on this. I therefore propose that early next week a meeting be held among all principal parties, Princeton Municipality, Mr. Barsky, and the ad hoc citizens group, which is currently securing firm commitments from Habitat for Humanity. That's a serious proposal. We can talk about adding principal parties if we want. I thus urge Princeton Council to table for 3, if not 5 weeks, that is either April 13th or April 27th, the ordinance introduced concerning Mary Moss Park and the Lytle Street property. This will allow time for deliberations and time for appropriate legal documentation. If you pass this ordinance tonight, you allow a demolition that is contrary to sustainable practices and the will of the people. If you defeat the ordinance, you effectively nullify Princeton's unwritten but honorable agreement with Mr. Barsky to purchase the property he has approached Princeton to sell, at which point he will surely sell elsewhere or build himself. I am out of time. I'm sorry for that. That's your choice. I urge you, please, to table the motion, or table the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Maker?
Wendy Mager, 459 Cherry Hill Road. Can people hear me? I'll try to speak a little louder. First of all, I want to make it clear that I'm just here speaking on my own personal behalf tonight, although I will make reference to Friends of Princeton Open Space, with which I'm associated on a couple of points. And I want to say that I am not in any way here to discourage people who want to preserve this particular property as a historic house. If that is the will of the people, and I understand there's some question about whether we fully know how everybody feels, but obviously there are a lot of people who want to do that. I believe I heard Ms. Waterbury say that the town cannot just take open space trust funds and use them to create affordable housing units. That much is clear. So the question is, can you, by the device of transferring the house after you buy it with open space funds, the device of transferring it to a nonprofit with some sort of historic restrictions, then have it ultimately be used as affordable housing in that way. And I think that would be the wrong way to go about this, and would set the wrong precedent with respect to the open space tax funds. It may not say anywhere in black and white that this is not what is permitted, but I think the understanding of the community, and certainly what you see in the field of purchase of land for open space preservation, is that it will result in something that is open to the public. And that's not what we're talking about here. And I know that when we were talking about consolidation and the continuation of the open space tax and why we should do that, what we were talking about was all the parcels in our master plan, which has been adverted to here tonight, that we still wanted to acquire. And that is what people saw as the priority. And I spent a lot of time on the telephone this morning with my friend Daniel Harris, and we talked about ways that preservation might occur, but I don't think it should be by the policy of this municipality to use the open space tax in that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I ask one new question? How often has it been your experience that you've purchased open space property that then has a structure on it that may need to be taken care of or rehabbed? I mean, have we done that in our open space acquisitions? I know the only reason we talked about it, somebody came before the Historic Preservation Committee, and there were some old structures on their property that needed protection,
Okay, I can think of two examples only. Of course, when we acquired the Mountain Lakes Preserve,
right,
that had a house on it, there was great concern on the part of, it was then the Township Council at the time, about the cost of maintaining that house. It was in pretty good shape, but it's a big, expensive house and would be expensive to maintain. And Friends of Open Space formed a related nonprofit which leases that house from the township and takes care of the maintenance costs. So that's one example. The other example is a pending project, the D'Ambrisi property, where it was contemplated that the house would be raised, and that has been done.
Thank you.
Oh, Mayor, I know at previous meetings we've had the neighbors speak first. I wonder if we could do that. So, because I'm afraid we're hearing all the non-neighbors, and that the hour will come and we won't have heard the neighbors.
Thank you for saying that. And I guess I would also like to give priority to people who were not able. I don't know if there's any neighbors here who weren't able to make it on Thursday who'd like to speak. Yeah, Ms. Satterfield?
My name is Shirley Satterfield. I live on Quarry Street. I have a picture here that actually I showed the mayor the other day, but this is a picture of a house in Princeton that the architecture sort of looks like the architecture at 31 and 33 Lytle Street. This house is on Green Street, and it's one of two houses that is vacant. This was a house of a proud black woman whose name was Mrs. Bransom. In this picture are the neighbors who lived in Witherspoon-Jackson community, and also dignitaries who came to Princeton. The man who's in the middle is Booker T. Washington. And when noted people came to Princeton, they couldn't stay in Nassau Inn, or they couldn't stay other places in Princeton. So our houses were boarding houses for people who came to Princeton. These are proud African Americans who lived in our community, and this is an example of what's happening to our houses. I don't know what's going to happen to that house on Green Street. I know one has been sold, but I don't know what's going to happen to the other one. But I want you to know that it is in disrepair, just like the one on 31 and 33 Lytle Street. But we need to save our homes, and we need to bring them back to the descendants who had to leave Princeton because they can't afford to stay. So I want everybody to look at this picture and look at the proud black people that lived in Princeton and how we want to continue this. I want to read something that was written in the 1980s that sort of is like what's happening now. The Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood has historically been the area in Princeton, New Jersey, for a lively and strongly bound African American community, as well as for Italian immigrants who came to Princeton mainly to work as stonecutters. This vital community dates back to the 18th century when European colonists brought their slaves. Many slaves were owned by the early Princeton University presidents and trustees. If I sound nervous, it's because this really means a lot to me. My family's been here for 6 generations, and we're always fighting for our rights in Princeton. Princeton was a Jim Crow town where racial segregation involved many public facilities, schools, shops, restaurants, houses, and the YWCA, YMCA until the early 1950s. The area known as the Witherspoon-Jackson community spanned from Jackson Street, now Paul Robeson Place, to Birch Avenue, and from Witherspoon Street to John Street. It was a self-organized and proud community that had its own school for colored children, as well as its own businesses, stores, and restaurants. The neighborhood also had its own churches, playgrounds, fraternal, and social clubs. By the way, the Mary Moss Playground is a playground, it's not a park. And that's where we had our park for 80 years. I see it. In the 1930s, the African American community was forcibly relocated from historic residence on Baker Street to make space for the construction of Palmer Square. In the 1960s, Jackson Street was demolished to provide for a thoroughfare that extended from Wigan Street to Route 206 Bayard Lane. Over the years, the Witherspoon-Jackson community has been continuously reduced and pushed increasingly farther away from central Nassau Street. Every block along Witherspoon Street, starting at the corner of Nassau and Witherspoon Streets, as well as the streets from Humphrey Street to Birch Avenue, are Black history sites. Presently, the African American community residing in what is left of the historic Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood represents far less than half of the entire neighborhood population. Many families have been forced to sell their homes that they owned for generations in order to accommodate commercialized gentrification. This has already brought in irreversible changes in the neighborhood, along with increasing fear that even the memory of it will disappear with its living witnesses. Unless this unique community in Princeton is deemed a historic district, all that will be left were the thoughts, I remember, I will never forget, I reminisce, and my time is up. No, that's it. That's the problem. They give us just a few minutes.
Oh, gosh, this thing is huge. Good evening, Bernadine Hines, 200 John Street. Can you hear me? Because it really doesn't sound like this mic. Okay, get close. Then I can't see my paper. Okay. There. Okay, there we go. Now I can hear myself. The public use of the Lytle Street House in a way that will satisfy the requirements that open space funding be based for public purposes. We have envisioned as follows, and the vision is one with which Habitat has already stated it is comfortable with. The elegant porch of 3133 Lytle can be used as the site for periodic celebrations and exhibitions concerning the immigrant experience in Princeton, with the African American experience at the core, but also including that of Caucasian, Latino, and the Italian American groups that have come semi-voluntarily and not as slaves or freed men and freed women. Specific days and weekends such as July 4th, Labor Day weekend, and even New Year's Day, when in 1863, those are some of the specific days and weekends that could be used. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln promulgated the Emancipation Proclamation. We have spoken with Shirley Satterfield, indefiable historian of the African American community, about ways in which a portable display which might be assembled for such occasions. Appropriate outdoor signage and a plaque on the building itself will indicate the high points of this experience. This indeed will fulfill the public use of the entire front yard. The Witherspoon-Jackson Group believes that through cooperation between all parties and a staunch willingness to question an area of law which Ms. Cecil has called quote-unquote gray, as there is no case law, we can achieve an outcome satisfactory to all interested parties. Once again, I agree with the comments and the people that have spoke before. Thank you. 1 minute. And I urge you to table the pending ordinance to allow time for mutual exploration and cooperation for an outcome in which the Witherspoon-Jackson community and all its allies devoutly wish. This is a very unique, one-time opportunity that we really need to take the time and do the right thing. So many times I've come before this council and said you have rushed decisions like Avalon Bay and gone down the wrong road without hearing all of the information from the neighborhood and not doing all the research. I truly believe in my heart this is a doable, yes, it is a challenging adventure and a challenging project. But I've heard from a lot of the different things that have been saying tonight, there are many options. We need to take the time to see through it. This can be done. It can be a win-win situation for everybody in Princeton and the Witherspoon-Jackson community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hendricks Davis, 232 John Street. I guess the question that comes to me is, what's the greatest public good to be derived from the disposition of the property at 3133 Lytle Street? I think that's really the question that Councilwoman Krumiller is asking. My personal opinion is that the expansion of Mary Moss Park is really not the best utilization of any public funds. I think that the council is looking for an expediency to use funds that are available or that have been made available to do something because they're there. The expansion of the park is lower on my list, I believe, and many other people's lists of best uses for those tax dollars because, or as they now say, and I'll tell you why, considerable resources have already been expended on upgrading, improving the park, or the playground as it is known by people in the neighborhood. There's not a lot of gain to be had by using $600,000 of public money to expand that playground by 40%. It will actually have an adverse effect in the eyes of many people because you will change the streetscape, you will demolish a building that is historic, at least in its structure, and you will wipe out a bit of significant history. So using those tax dollars, I think, is really not in the best interest of the public if it's simply to expand the amount of space and upgrade the park, which has already been upgraded, and where within a few hundred feet there is a park that has multiple acres and multiple facilities available to the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood and all of Princeton. So I would encourage you to really think very carefully about how you're expending those tax dollars. Again, I believe that the better use of the property is for housing. It currently has a house on it. That house, until Mr. Tash sold it, was producing tax revenue for the town, and it will produce tax revenue for the town if it is purchased by private individuals and developed into, it can produce it and developed into affordable housing or a mix of affordable market and potentially even, affordable, moderate and market rate housing if that can be achieved. So if that can't be achieved, because you asked the question, Councilwoman Krumiller, I would think that the best use of the land that is there is to be developed for housing and let the current developer do it himself, get ratables that are bringing tax income, tax monies to the town, and at the same time put into place, through the power that you have as a council, measures to ensure that property owners who are in the community for a long period of time are not more adversely affected by the high-scale development that's coming into this particular neighborhood. So that's my opinion, and I would encourage you to either table the motion further so that more deliberation and planning can be done by those who are working on this, including myself, or vote it down.
Thank you.
One point of information I'd like to make, Henrik's had reference to a 40% increase in the size of the park. It's actually approximately 75% increase in the size of the park by adding the additional 5,400 square feet.
Thank you. Heidi Fichtenbaum, 38 Carnahan Place, and I just want to make clear that I'm here representing just myself, although I am a member of the Princeton Environmental Commission, and I tend to take that sort of environmental perspective in my thinking. I think when I think about it, there, for me, sustainability is this very broad circle. And it encompasses not only our natural environment, but our cultural environment. It's very important to make that sustainable. And I think that that's what I hear Shirley Satterfield saying, is that we've lost track of making our cultural resources, preserving those, and making that sustainable. That's part of who we are. So both from just a sort of a material standpoint, where you're an existing building and preserving that is going to be sort of the most sustainable thing you can do, even if you have to rehab it. It's more sustainable to do that than to knock it down and send all that stuff to landfill, recycling, whatever. So just from purely a building sustainability standpoint, it's better to do that. But from a cultural standpoint, and I can think of a lot of cases, case in point, the Freedom Trail in Boston, where it's really outdoor space. You're traveling through open space and you're visiting a number of stops along the way that's teaching you about the history in the Boston area, history that's really important to all of us. I think that the Jackson Witherspoon neighborhood has such potential on that score. There's the Robeson house, and there's this house, and there are other houses. And whether it's just the porch or there was a first floor museum space with residential unit on top and, something else behind, there are a lot of things that one could think of that would make it really fit well with, say, open space, fit well with historic preservation, and also work from the standpoint of environmental sustainability. And I recognize that the financial picture is what's really critical here. But if it's something that's being done just because some cash came along and you could get some matching funds and it seemed like a good idea, it seems to me like it would be really worthwhile spending a little bit more time. There's been a phenomenal amount of energy put in, from what I've seen, just watching the emails fly by this group of people in just a 1 week period. And if truly Habitat would be willing to step up and there was a way to make this work, and a way that the open space funds could be used that really meet the criteria, then I would say go for it. And whatever you have to do with your motion to make that happen, I would encourage you to do it.
Hi, Stephanie Chorney, 11 Race Street, also an Environmental Commission member. I've really enjoyed listening to everyone talk today, and I think it really actually is becoming very clear. I met Hendrix actually walking to the park with my son, who's now 11. We were the only ones in that park on almost all the occasions. It's a very nice park. I think it's adequate as is. I don't think open space money, public money, should be used to make that park larger. As much as sometimes that pains me to say, why wouldn't you want a larger, more beautiful park? There are multiple parks close by, and I think preserving housing is the most important thing than expanding a park where there's already a park that's not used as much as it could be. So I feel strongly that if there's any possibility of a way of maintaining the current house that gets rehabbed and be used for either the public good and or affordable housing, that would be the way to go. If it has to be used for housing other than affordable, do I think that's better than expanding the park? I think I do, because using that public money, I think for open space, this is not the best possible open space that we could use the money for. So I think those are my comments. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marina Rubina. I'm Shirley Satterfield's next door neighbor. I live in a neighborhood, and I'm a mother of
Can you make sure you speak right
two
into the mic?
children who use that park on a regular basis. I don't know whether it's a good idea to expand the park or not. That's for you guys to decide. I have two suggestions. I am also an architect. I happen to be an architect of record of the Trenton Restore for Habitat for Humanity, so I have worked closely with Tom Caruso on that project, and if they decide to do work here in our neighborhood, I'm perfectly happy to help them and work with them if they could get funds together and purchase this, and I'm perfectly happy to work with them to help them out to rehab the house. If they're unable to do that, my second suggestion, going back to what Ms. Grummeller's question was, as a neighborhood, we could get, and maybe Habitat could help us organize this, we could get enough people together to salvage historic elements of this building, and working with Shirley, and we could build something for the park that will have historical significance. Of course, it wouldn't be saving the entire building, but if that's not possible, that could be another solution that nobody has proposed thus far, actually building a structure out of elements of that house, reusing elements of the porch, reusing whatever. We will, Shirley and I live next door, we'll work together, and somehow building an element that could house activities for the park. Maybe it's a shade structure where we could have historical references, historical descriptions of what happened, function as a porch where people could sit and watch the street go by, wave at each other, and be part of the community. Again, whether that won't bring any tax money, I understand, but that could be another solution that hasn't been proposed yet.
Can I just get a quick show of hands, too, of people who still want to speak tonight who haven't gotten a chance? Okay.
Hi, Frank Smith. Most of you guys know me who know me as Dean, but my legal name is Frank, and I'm on 17 McLean Street. My mother lives at 11 McLean Street, but she's away right now, so couldn't be here. I have to say, first of all, that it would be my choice, first and foremost, to have more affordable housing in our neighborhood. And if that is a reasonable possibility for this property, I think that that should be pursued. I don't know if that's a reasonable possibility, but I think it should be explored a little bit more. Taking a walk down that street just in the past year, there is a great transformation going on all down that street. And the whole complexion of the neighborhood is changing, and I don't know if that's necessarily for the better. That's not exactly why I'm here. If that's not a possibility, I do feel an obligation to second. There was a young man here the other night who was an advocate for expanding the park, and he got a lot of applause. And maybe that's just for standing up and saying how he felt about it. But there are a lot of children that don't have a voice. And yes, this park is underutilized. I also own the toy store, and I could probably give a lot of insight as to why this park is underutilized. In terms of the neighborhood parks around Princeton, it is probably the least appealing park in terms of its play value. So I think that folks need to consider these things from the perspective of a child as well. And if we want our parks to be utilized, especially this neighborhood park, and yes, Community Park is just a few hundred yards away, but for young children, Community Park is quite intimidating on a lot of levels. It's why we have the smaller neighborhood parks. And I think that we need to think about that when we're making these decisions, just to keep those children in mind that are utilizing the park, like my son, like some of my son's friends from the neighborhood, and how if it's not a possibility to, so the question is, if we can't rescue this home for affordable housing, should we have an expanded park? I don't know if we should have an expanded park. That would be great for a lot of the kids in the neighborhood, for sure. But we need, in my view, we need to look at that park in terms of its play value for the children that are living in that neighborhood, and think about possible improvements to the park. I know it's been improved, but even further, so that park is utilized by the folks in the neighborhood up to its potential. Thank you.
Paul Driscoll, Harris Road. First, I would like to address the condition of the house at 3133 Laurel Street. About 10 days ago, I took a picture of the back of the house. I meant to have a photo with me tonight. My printer didn't work, so it appears that the window on the second story is completely missing. So I was wondering about that, if anyone was aware of that, because that allows the rain and snow and the water from the rain and snow to create further damage to the structure. And if there is any chance of saving this house, the window should be sealed off to better protect the existing structure. In recent years, we have seen numerous cases where a smaller and comparatively affordable market rate house has been torn down and frequently replaced by a much larger and more expensive home, which is frequently out of size and scale with the neighborhood. Most importantly, the newer homes are no longer affordable to working-class, middle-class neighborhoods. The house at 3133 Lytle Street, with its beautiful front porch, and in terms of its size, scale, and affordability, is very much in character with the rest of the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood. Is there any reason why affordable housing should necessarily be confined to larger housing projects, some which may be completely out of size and scale with the surrounding neighborhoods? The house, lot, and location at 3133 Lytle Street is perfectly suited for affordable housing. I am not a financial expert, but I believe that Princeton has the resources to convert this house into affordable units. I also believe that if council really wants to find a way to convert number 3133 to affordable units, they will manage to achieve this goal. About a year ago, I came before council and asked if there was an effective way to actively include residents in the decision-making process. At that time, it was generally agreed that this was a good question. Too often, a project is presented to residents after it's been fully developed. In the case of Mary Moss Park, the groundwork has been done. The funds have been allocated by the county, and it appears the council may have been influenced to embark on a specific plan of action. Unfortunately, residents were not made aware of the project until recently, making it most difficult for them or for the town to modify or change course. Of all the council meetings I have attended in the past 2 years, I have never once heard a resident demand that Mary Moss Playground be upgraded. So why would we work on a project when there is no apparent need? I would like to request that council reconsider the scale for redeveloping Mary Moss Playground and make every possible effort to save the house at 3133 Lytle Street to be converted to affordable housing. Kip Cherry and Daniel Harris have provided some ideas for this. At the very best, or at least, it is a beautiful example of an older historical home that must be preserved. And thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Mary Clerman on Harris Road. I don't live in the neighborhood directly, but I walk there all the time, and the reason I walk there is that it's such an attractive neighborhood. Every house is different, and it's very friendly. It just has a really nice feeling when the sun comes down on the collaborative buildings. It's just a nice place to walk. So I appreciate the fact that you want to do something good. It's very nice that some money has become available. I would support the idea of saving this house. The children already have a park. I haven't heard of any successes with historic preservation. 14% of the population of the town is 65 years or older. this is something that would be appreciated by the people who are in that age group as well. Furthermore, I think that the way that the residents this evening have presented their ideas is really very telling in support of what my neighbor Paul has just said. You guys recently completed a report on neighborhood advisory councils. This is your perfect opportunity. The way that Daniel has suggested that you get together and include all of the people who are vested interest in the park or in the area, in the house, that you all get together and you all talk to each other in an open manner so that everything is visible and understood and can be actually dealt with by all of you together, because everybody has very strong and very good opinions. You just need to work together. It's possible to compromise. I think what you should be looking for is a compromise that gives something to everyone, not something that's just predetermined. Thank you.
My name is Robert von Zimbush. I am on the member of the Historic Preservation Commission and live at 113 Princeton Kingston Road. I'd just like to say that I hope that what really is the outcome of perhaps this meeting is a deferral, of placing this on hold for a while, because I think more time is really needed. I'd like to say a couple of things. One is the county does allow historic preservation from its open space funds. However, it has chosen on its own to leave that only for their own buildings, and they do have their buildings, and they do desperately need repairs. So that's perfectly logical. The Princeton open space money funding was certainly meant also for historic preservation. There were 5 groups. That was E, the last one, and that can be used. I'd I've been working for a number of years now with the village of Kingston, of which Princeton is only a small part. It's a non-incorporated community, but I've been on the Village Advisory Committee, and we work very hard to get historic preservation easement on a house. And that easement provided for historic preservation. It was for a private owner and also development. It allowed a certain amount of addition to be placed, a certain percentage to be added to the house and also to an accessory building. I think that probably the most reasonable way of affecting this is to utilize Habitat for Humanity, but also some additional private funds. But the municipality could buy, as Franklin Township did in Kingston, a historic preservation easement. And the most important thing is the exterior, and that's what the Historic Preservation Ordinance basically takes care of in reviewing projects and so on. This is not in a designated historic district. However, it is a district which the Historic Preservation Commission, as I know Joe Butler knows, has been talking about for a long time. Unfortunately, we didn't really hear about this project in this area until very recently. And I do think that there is a possibility, and I think if we all work on this, we really can bring something together which is a win-win. I think that building can be preserved. I think additions can be placed on the rear. Certainly, the house has to be gutted. I don't think there's any question about that. But that certainly can be done. There also, it is possible with open space funds. There's another building in Kingston, the Laurel Avenue School, which was purchased with open space funds from Franklin Township again, as part of really they were trying to preserve the playground, but they preserved the school, they bought the school as well. Because it's in a historic district, it was able, by Green Acres regulations, it will be leased to a nonprofit. That's a process going on now. And that could happen here too, but unfortunately in this case, it's not in a district yet. So it would have to be in a district first before that could be done. What I'd just like to say in terms of historic preservation, sustainability, and the possibility of affordable housing, and even if it were low market rate housing, this would be better. if we could preserve that. In the 1981 architectural survey that designated a large part of this group, which later became, as a result of a state historic preservation opinion, considered eligible for the National Register, the one building on Lytle Street that was picked out for individual significance was 3133. And that means that that was a building that was contributing to the district, and it's really critical to that district. So I would really urge you to try all possible means to see what we can do. And I do think that probably it's only reasonable that there be a little bit of additional time in order to work this out. And I'm hopeful that if everyone works on this, we really can do something. And certainly the Historic Preservation Commission is willing to work and would like very much to work with everyone else on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're actually at 1 hour and 15, but I just want to get a show of hands of who still wants to speak. Okay, we'll do, so John and Yaina, and then we're going to close it and bring it back to council.
I'll be quick. John Heilner, Library Place. Preserving the house at 3133 Lytle Street achieves two goals, as many people have said. Maintaining lower cost housing stock, which is something we talk about all the time, but specifically in an area of Princeton where families and children can walk to work, to schools, shops, and to our cultural institutions. And it also preserves the physical and visual history of a proud and important part of Princeton's history. We are not against upgrading the Mary Moss Park on its current footprint. We understand that it can and will be done with a separate grant from the county called the Mercer at Play Fund. Addressing Ms. Cecil's very good legal analysis, specifically in footnote 6, where she talks about the entire Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood declared eligible for listing. Well, as Robert just said, there is a specific survey sheet from 1980 that addresses just 3133 Lytle and was written by the New Jersey State Historical Preservation Office. Okay, the economics are yet to be determined. There have been a lot of emails flying back and forth about that. 3 units could come from using the small additions already on the back of the house, or maybe replacing them with a more functional, larger addition. This may or may not be possible, but I feel very strongly that we should be creative before throwing out that idea. We have been talking with an architect who is interested in looking at that with us. Since Habitat for Humanity has volunteered to do the rehab work, we're really only talking about the acquisition cost. And at most, that would be something under $600,000. So if you amortize that over 3 units, we're talking about under $200,000 per unit, which I suspect is pretty competitive when we talk about affordable housing around town. And we're in the process of checking that out. And of course, even that can be recouped through the rental revenue income stream. So I would just urge that when thinking about this and the cost per unit, please remember the benefits are twofold. The housing that's affordable and also preserving history and culture. You know, everyone talks about the horror of gentrification destroying the Princeton that we all know and love, but nobody ever does anything about it, as if it can't be done. Seems to me this is an opportunity where we can all work together and be creative. This is something that we can do to enable our low and middle income residents and their children to stay here. This is something the governing body could take a lot of pride in, I think, instead of all of us, you know, townspeople and governing body throwing up their hands and saying, well, it's just gentrification. So let's start with the premise with a positive attitude that this is our objective. If it can't be done, then it can't be done. In summary, I would strongly support an ordinance for the town to purchase the property, but not demolish the structure. And to do that, I would suggest that we table the ordinance until April 27th to give us time to check out all these many things that have been talked about tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Yana?
Thank you very much, Mayor. I was trying to abide by your ruling, let all of the neighbors. I don't live there anymore, you know. I live on Harris Road.
I think you're an honorary neighbor, to say the least.
You know, thank you very much, and I'd like to believe that. I would hope that we would still work together to arrive at the use of that house for affordable. And let us not perpetuate some of the things that I consider discriminatory. For instance, we made a weak argument for some open space around what's now the Arts Council, and the variance was granted in spite of that. We like open space as well as anybody else does. The funds that are in the open space funding, are they tax dollars or?
Yes.
You can tell me.
Yes, they were voted on by referendum.
But they are tax dollars.
Correct.
And someplace along the way, can you still move funds around from one use to another towards the end of the year?
Not from the open space fund.
Can't do that anymore?
You can, but not from the open space fund.
I'm sorry, not open space funds? Oh, they're immune to that.
Yes, because they're specifically set aside by voter referendum. They're collected separately.
Do I contribute to it?
Yes, you do.
Okay. And I paid my taxes a quarter in advance, so I think I paid for it. The opportunity now to have the governing body participate in an attempt to try to provide housing for those who need it, really. And any thought that would preclude doing everything we can to work towards providing that housing or assisting in providing that housing, I think would be ludicrous, and I also think it would be a continuation of what has been done. The Mary Morse Park has been there. Shirley, how long has the Mary Morse Park been there? Over 80 years. Did it come up at any time prior to the last 2 or 3 years? And why didn't it? Does anybody know? Thank you. I didn't think you did. It's simply a continuation, really, of this separate and unequal stuff. We saw fit to grant the arts, and I love the arts, I really do. And I know the young lady is very active in open space. And she's also mindful that when you, and that's in the heart of, part of the district we're talking about. But no one paid much attention to that asking for a variance, getting a variance. The way the borough zoning ordinance read is if you modify or get a variance on a non-conforming building, you're supposed to bring it into conformity. I could ask my son, he's here. So I don't think we should stand up and say, gee whiz, restriction, restriction, restriction for the use of some space that's going to serve to the benefit of the entire town. And incidentally, Mayor, I think you made a monumentous decision to let just the neighbors speak. I'm glad you didn't recognize them by color. Thank you so much.
Yana Moore, Green Street. I hope after hearing all of the testimony this evening, the goodwill, the opportunities, and yes, the challenges that have been outlined, the elected body can actually see that this is an opportunity to do some things that I think have been said are part of a priority, and that is to preserve neighborhoods and to provide affordable housing. If you're not going to do it now, and it's tough, when are you going to do it? If you don't vote this evening, which certainly could be deferred, as has been suggested for further planning, inevitably, I would hope you would authorize the use of your funds that are collected for open space, the municipal funds, for the purchase of this property. And create a plan for its historic preservation, using an easement or deed restrictions for the property, and as Ms. Satterfield suggested in terms of preserving the facades, and use either housing trust funds or other forms of partnerships to provide for affordable housing at the site. Ironically, with due respect to Ms. Mayor, and recognizing Mr. Floyd's statement, we all contribute to the open space. And the borough actually increased its amount of payment, the former borough, to the open space funds. There have been thousands of acres throughout the state of New Jersey that have been purchased for open space. And at the onset of that provision, there were many challenges to just the effects of what open space has. Yes, there are positive environmentals and they have many benefits, but even as we know, the Johnson Tract as an example, it also thwarted efforts to provide for affordable housing, where there were housing developments perhaps planned, and part of those developments would have had affordable housing. And that effect puts pressure on the rest of our community, and which is why we find ourselves in this position, as Ms. Krummeller noted, to always having to build new, because our net gain for what we have for affordable housing is actually in the negative if the municipality does nothing to preserve what already stands as affordable housing throughout the neighborhoods. New building would be necessary. So I would hope, as Mr. Howland said, you would see that this is a twofer, a preservation of a historic property and affordable housing. And it cannot be measured on the basis of a developer's interest to gain profit. That is not what the municipality or governing body can solely judge by. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for speaking tonight very eloquently, and I think we've heard you, and I want to ask counsel, Ms. Crowler.
Well, before we really get into the discussion, I just wanted to address what a few of the people have said about how this came about, and all of a sudden we're spending this open space money just because we got it. And I know that just about since was elected to ever since I was elected to Borough Council, and especially since I've been on the planning board, I've been advocating for spending open space in the denser areas of town. I've always thought that open space that people could walk to would be beneficial to more people than like per square foot or per acre than open space that is outlying, in the outlying neighborhoods. Another thing about open space that I've always believed is that it benefits everyone, but it especially benefits neighbors. And a lot of the open space that we've been purchasing has wealthy neighbors. There are very few low-income neighborhoods that are adjacent to our open space. And so when I heard about, when I heard about this opportunity, I thought that's exactly what I've been talking about, and I have been talking about it. When are we going to put, and I think you all have heard me say, and I think all of us have been talking about it. I think especially the former borough members were, we've known that the former borough residents' open space tax went up, and so we've been looking to spend open space money in town. So I just wanted to kind of make that point before we even got into our discussion. But, I'm not saying that I haven't heard what everyone's saying, and, I just want to say I've been really surprised, but I'm made a radical shift in my thinking about this park based on what everyone said, because I have to admit that I thought everyone would be happy about it, and because I would be happy, I thought, if I lived there, I would like to have a nice green open space next to me. So I just wanted to explain that. But I also now, I'm definitely having second thoughts, and I want to hear from the other council members.
Mr. Liveman?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is very, very interesting, and I'll tell you why. I felt Shirley's pain when she was speaking, but I didn't feel the pain for the building at all. And I'll be honest with you. That community has unfolded before our very eyes. The Witherspoon Jackson group, over the years, has unfolded. It's not the same community it was, and I don't know what the community is going to turn or look like in the future. But it is a great, great community. Someone mentioned the Freedom Trails of Boston, which are great, and I think Heidi mentioned that. If we could have something like that for the Princeton community, it would be ideal. To save a building for a museum or to save a building for our history is a lot different than to save a building for affordable housing. I'm the first one to stand up here and say I believe in affordable housing. I reduce a lot of my rents for affordable housing so people can stay in Princeton and not ask for market, just for that reason. I am the first one to say if there's an opportunity for affordable housing that we should jump on the bandwagon. I'm also a taxpayer, a very high taxpayer in Princeton. And for me to spend $600,000 for that residence, unfortunately, is not worth it. It's a great place. And I'm not here to say that it's not historical, but there are so many other historical places in that neighborhood that aren't in that condition that we should be looking at restoring at this time. And maybe turning it into a museum, or turning it into something that we can benefit the whole town. To take this development now and to turn it into an affordable house will not benefit the entire community at all. It will benefit a few. $65,000 is a lot of money, unfortunately. I know it doesn't sound like a lot for some people. It's a lot of money for someone in affordable housing. That's not the kind of people, unfortunately, that I'm looking at putting into these kind of affordable housing. $65,000 is a lot of money. And I don't mind, affordable housing, people paying the rate, but that's a lot of money for a lot of people. So I'm looking at really trying to find a way, and that's what we've been trying to do in Princeton with affordable housing, to bring people back. People that can afford it. Some of these people make $30,000 a year, $25,000 a year, $19,000 a year. They can't pay $65,000 to live. We need to find a way to bring people back to Princeton. And I'm the first to stand up here and say, I'll do whatever it takes. But it's just difficult at this point, and I've mentioned this to so many people that we're behind the ball on this, to spend $600,000 on a place that's really a two-bedroom unit, to expand that to three units. I mean, the money that you would spend, to raise the roof, I know the numbers, it's not $200,000, it's way over that number. I would propose this. If you think that Habitat for Humanity has the money, or you think there's a partnership out there, I'll be willing to wait. I don't know about my council people to wait, if you think that there's money out there to do it. But for me, I'm personally telling anyone here, I'm not going to vote to spend $600,000 for that dwelling. I'm just not going to do it. But I'll be willing to listen to a partnership if you have someone willing to spend the money to do the project. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to speak, or Ms. Kremler does, but I want to give everyone a chance first. Nope.
Well, I just wanted to answer Lance, and that's about exactly where I am. And I would propose, respecting all the work everyone's done, and that we table this, to give them the opportunity to come up with a solution. I've heard such opposition to the plan that I think we owe it to the people to let them try to find a solution. I want to be clear that it would be irresponsible of us to spend so much money on, to purchase the house outright. And so I'm only tabling it in the hopes that we can find a way for funding to pay, outside funding to help pay for it.
I'd like to point out that I don't think it's necessary to table the resolution to give the group that is working on this and has put a lot of effort into it an opportunity to keep going ahead. If we vote to pass the resolution tonight, we are not committing ourselves to purchase the property. We're putting the funds in place so that if we decide to purchase the property at a later time, we can do so. Passing the resolution, passing the ordinance tonight means that the money is there to purchase the property. Tabling the resolution tonight means we bring it up again at the next or some subsequent council meeting and probably defers action on it for 5 or 6 weeks. Passing the resolution tonight means that there is no vote to purchase the property until the meeting on April 13th.
Yeah, Ms. Butler?
Well, I want to agree with a lot of what has been said tonight, both by members, by residents, and also by my fellow councilman. Like Jenny, I have been concerned that the residents of the borough are paying a slightly higher amount into the open space tax, and although we're one community, like Jenny, I also felt as if I wanted to make sure that the residents of the borough were getting a fair shake when it came to the expenditure of our open space money. Also, we heard a lot, not in the very distant past, about this neighborhood being the most densest neighborhood in our town. So initially when we heard about the possibility of getting this additional space to add to Mary Moss Park, it really did seem as if it would be in the best interest of the neighborhood. And I'm a little, it's upsetting to me to hear from people who live in homes on lots that are bigger than Mary Moss Park say that Mary Moss Park is adequate for all the people that live in that neighborhood. Whether or not we can save this house remains to be seen. I think our attorney was fairly clear, the administrator was fairly clear. We cannot use our open space money to convert this to affordable housing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. So we heard a lot about affordable housing tonight, and as much as we all support affordable housing, it's simply not an option. Am I correct?
Not if you're using your open space funds, no.
Right. And maybe if we'd had the budget discussion first, it would be clear that we don't have the money from elsewhere, unless we're going to raise new taxes to pay for this. And I think Lance has kind of outlined why that's going to be a pretty tough sell. And I think Patrick outlined in the beginning what our choices are. We run the risk of losing the property altogether. We don't own the house. Roman Barsky owns the house. He has permits, he has the demolition permits, and, we could all wake up tomorrow and the house is gone. So I agree with President Miller that I think we can go ahead and approve the authorization tonight. It doesn't mean that we move on the property. There's still steps to be taken, and that if people can come up with some other option, I think we're all willing to listen to it. We all, support affordable housing. We all support historic preservation. The community does a lot of good things. But in the absence of, if that house is torn down, my preference would certainly be to improve the park ahead of additional homes at this point. We're not adding 20 new units on that house. It is not substantially going to affect housing prices or make the whole neighborhood more affordable. So in the absence of that, I would support the purchase of the empty lot for an expansion of the park.
Mr. Simon, and then Ms. Howard.
The discussion tonight really saddens me, and it saddens me because we've been asked to deliver something we can't deliver in a fiscally responsible way. There is no way that we can do what's being asked of us in what would be a cost-effective way in terms of delivering affordable housing. I thought I was very clear in that message up front, and I also thought that people understood that simply from looking at the numbers. Apparently that's not the case. I can't defend to the rest of the taxpayers of this town the proposal that's been put before us and advocated by the majority of the speakers tonight. It's simply not an efficient use of funds, and it would contribute to a rising tax rate for the town as one of the bad decisions if we look back at it. I agree with Councilman Liverman that the house is simply not worth it. We had an opportunity, the choice we had, and by the way, people got the sequence of events wrong as well. What happened was Mr. Barsky purchased the property. That's what happened. The ability to do something other than have further gentrification by his building is what we intervened to try to avoid. We had $300,000 of our own money available, and we were able to get the county to offer to kick in half as well. That's the extent of the resources we have available, and that's the best we can do. And what we heard tonight is that if we do that, it will create a it will just rent the fabric of the neighborhood. It will create bitterness toward this council and toward other people within the neighborhood. And I'm sorry, I can't support that either. At this point, the people who are pushing for this solution are going to have to find a way to fund it. The town cannot responsibly do so. Well, you will have to negotiate that time with Mr. Barsky, as far as I'm concerned. We cannot. It's not appropriate for this council to take this project, which is extremely cost ineffective in terms of its delivery of affordable housing, which the Affordable Housing Board could not agree on, and to simply listen to the advocates who have simply ignored the cost and the numbers that have come before us. And I'm really sorry to have to deliver this message. I completely understand the pain that several of the speakers have raised in terms of the change of the neighborhood. This council is not responsible for the gentrification of that neighborhood. There are very few tools at our disposal for controlling that. And there are side effects to all of the possible tools that we could apply, and they're way outside of the discussion that we've had today. That would be part of a different discussion. I'm really terribly sorry to communicate this. I understand the pain that people are communicating in terms of the change of the neighborhood and the loss that they're experiencing. I fundamentally disagree that just because we wish it were so, we should spend the money. We can't do that responsibly. It is not a prudent public policy to do so.
Ms. Howard?
Okay, thank you. I want to add my voice. I really appreciate how many people came out and spoke so eloquently and from their hearts. I fear we've been looking at this as if it's been a false choice. There just does not appear to be a way to make this work as affordable housing. And just to add more, to flesh out what Patrick was just saying, it's not cost effective, I think was the word you used, cost efficient. And what that means is we would get less affordable housing if we spent the money here. And so we have 1,000 people on our, 1,000 people, Christy, on our waiting list for affordable housing. I'm sorry, 1,900, wow. 2,000 people on our waiting list. Right. That's absolutely, I would take your point, Mayor Floyd, that is probably an undercounting of the demand for affordable housing. So the point being here, if we do, this proposal is not an efficient use of our limited affordable housing funds and actually will result in less affordable housing for the community. We've got an affordable housing task force that's been looking at these issues. We've got ideas, and I think, you know, we should all be renewing our commitment. But also what I fear here is that this is clearly not the last time we're going to be having this discussion about this neighborhood, and once again, we're dealing with things sort of, you know, in the wrong order. Obviously, things are coming to us and we're being reactive, and so I hope that what we can commit to is I know there have been discussions and a lot of thinking about a potential historic district for this neighborhood, to me, it's a plea for moving fast, or else we're going to be having this same discussion again and again. And it's what's happened on so many things where we have been, our zoning laws are late to the game, and we're in a pickle in terms of what we can do. So it's not the most efficient, won't result in the most affordable housing when we know there's tremendous need. But it does cause, but I know that's frustrating for people to hear, and I guess that's just a plea for all of us to continue to move forward on thinking towards long-term solutions for the neighborhood so that we're not dealing with these on an ad hoc, reactive basis.
Okay, thank you. Just a second. I have just a question about timing. So I think we've heard loud and clear. I mean, it's amazing to hear this outpouring of energy and enthusiasm. And I think what you're hearing from council is that there's constraints on the ability to spend the public money on this project because of the way it's tied up. And but there's so much enthusiasm there. It's like, maybe it's possible to raise the private money in order to do the project. And I guess my question is, if we follow Council President Miller's suggestion of passing the ordinance tonight, what sort of timetable does that put in place? Does that potentially accelerate the possibility of the demolition? Or will the timing essentially be the same if we hold off and take a vote on the 13th at our next meeting?
I obviously can't speak for Roman Barsky, but the point I want to make is you don't own the property. He has pulled demolition permits. He could technically take that house down any day. I think through the hard work of all of you and your staff, he's been holding off. As I said, I can't speak for him. I can't read tea leaves, but you would be rolling the dice if you tabled the ordinance that he might decide, you know what, this is simply never going to happen. I'm taking the house down. I'm proceeding with the development application that I have filed, and I'm going forward. I can't tell you that that's what's going to happen, but I think you're running that risk. I think if you adopt the ordinance, as Council President Miller said, it's an authorizing ordinance, not a compelling ordinance. So you're simply putting the mechanism in place and laying the groundwork for the purchase of this property should you decide to go forward with it. You're not compelling that outcome. I do think you would be sending a signal. I mean, this is my personal view. I think you'd be sending Mr. Barsky a signal that you are still serious about buying the property, and maybe that would help incline him towards holding off on any demolition, hanging in there, while you guys and the various groups who've spoken here tonight explore options. I want to emphasize, I'm not a mind reader, I can't guarantee any of this, but that's the way it looks to me.
Okay, and then the message then to all the folks that came out here tonight who are really energetic about saving the building is that would in some ways need to be a separate process and a private approach, and almost as if they were coming as a private purchaser of the property. That would lead to the most options in terms of using the property for affordable housing, or at least if the bulk of the money could be raised, we could do some sort of public-private partnership, but the deadline for that, it's possible that we'd be moving again on April 13th, correct?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the timing, quite frankly, is going to be driven by the property owner, because that's who owns the property, so that's, who's in control at this point. I will say this too, and I think I had mentioned this earlier, you cannot actually close with Mr. Barsky without taking further formal action as a body, because again, all you're doing is putting funding in place and authorizing a purchase, but you haven't approved a final purchase price, you haven't approved a purchase and sale contract. So there isn't, you can't do anything under the dark of night, I guess is my point here. You will have to take further agendized formal action as a body.
But that's a resolution, that's a one vote.
It is a one vote. Yes, it can be a one vote, but you have the ability to provide more notice than that to, to do more in terms of making sure that the public knows and has input. Joe, you looked like you had a question about something else.
Well, no, finish your thought. I do have a question or comment, but
I do too. My thought's over.
Could I just say, there was a suggestion made by a neighbor and an architect, I don't know whether she's still, yes, she is still here. And we had also talked about this a little bit in trying to think about whether there was some kind of win-win or compromise or something, but I don't know who would be communicating with Barsky, but in the event that something happens between now and April 13th, if we had expanded space, if we were to get that property, we had talked about the possibility of using that porch. One of the things that we would think about, and we've heard the need for in the park, is more shade structure, just like we're hearing it at the community park pool. And we will have to have some sort of facility to house, possibly a bathroom and possibly filtration. And so is there any way that someone can speak to him and let him know that we would be interested in the architectural detailing of that porch, regardless of what happens? Can that be communicated to him? I mean, I'd hate to see him just tear down the house in the next several weeks and we don't get any of it.
Sure, I've been speaking with the Barskys, and we can certainly communicate that, but then the question is, if you want to preserve that particular porch, somebody has to hire somebody who can do it and separate it from the house. And
we would have to do that if we want it. That's typically how that works. As part of tearing that down, he couldn't extract that.
That's the way I would see it occurring, because the Barskys, the way they normally deal with homes is they contract with the demolition guy, and he comes in and, to preserve a porch of the house, it's a different scope of work that certainly adds cost.
Okay. I just want to remind council it's 10 of 11, and we do need to introduce the budget. So we're going to be here past 11 o'clock. That's the first warning. And yeah, Ms. Kremler?
Well,
sorry, Jenny was waiting in there.
I want to reiterate or I would like to make a motion to table the ordinance rather than pass it until April 14th. I feel that, so I'm just going to cut to the chase. I think it's a bad way to start a project amidst such opposition. And so I would like to give the people who are looking for private funding and for some way to make preservation happen. I do strongly favor preserving the house if it were possible. I agree with the people who are mourning its loss, and I would mourn the loss too, although I would much rather have an expanded playground than new big double houses that are probably going to increase the taxes in the neighborhood because they'll probably raise up the property values. And that usually happens. And so I do want to make it clear that I really support fixing up the park, and and I don't think it's likely that we're going to find a solution, but I think it's a good idea to at least try, in part because I think it's the best thing to do, the best way to work. We asked everyone to come now to 2 meetings, and we've heard a really strong message from the neighborhood. And so I think to respect them, I would like to table it.
Can I just clarify, you're tabling until April 13th?
Just until April 13th, and I also want to make it clear that I think it would be irresponsible to spend $600,000 on for one affordable unit.
Ms. Howard?
I would say that I'm sympathetic, Jenny, but I think we heard from our council that there's a real risk if we table it that Barsky could tear it down and then we've got nothing, and that this process may actually be the better way to preserve it. Sorry for not, I won't second it.
So is there a second then? No, is there a different motion? or Mr. Council President Miller, did you?
I agree with Jenny, but I think that it is a terrible way to start the project, and I think Patrick described accurately, we're all not happy about this, but it is where we find ourselves, and I think that our best chance of coming up with some good outcome is to go ahead and act on, do we need to move this tonight? I mean, I thought we didn't need to move it. It's already been moved. Do we need to move the ordinance now?
Move its adoption, yes. You would need a motion and a second.
I am going to go ahead and move it.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
So it's been...
And I'd like to comment on why I'm seconding it. It has become very clear to me that we can spend open space funds to buy open space or do preservation of historic properties. We can spend affordable housing funds to develop affordable housing. We can also spend general funds to develop affordable housing if we choose to do so. But we cannot take open space funds and use the open space funds to build affordable housing, nor do I think we can take affordable housing funds and use them to buy open space or perhaps even do historic preservation. I'm concerned that if we delay action, we're sending a signal to Mr. Barsky. If we take action, we're sending a signal to Mr. Barsky that the money is in place and we can act if we choose to do so. If we don't take action, then we're sending the signal to Mr. Barsky, the money is not in place and council is not prepared to act.
Okay, so the motion was made by Ms. Butler, seconded by Mr. Miller. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Crum-Miller?
No.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
And Mr. Simon?
No.
Motion carries.
Okay, the motion carries 4-2. And do the people who objected want to give their reasons?
Oh, I already did.
Okay.
I'm happy to. We're voting basically on a motion to fund a park, and we have heard that we do not have support for that. Again, I have a hard time justifying to the other taxpayers in town why we would be allocating the funds in this way.
Well, I also want to say that when it comes time to vote on the acquisition, if there is no alternate plan, I plan to support it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. We have to move on but. Yeah, come to the mic. No, come to.
Point of order. Point of order.
Going to try and make this
It's passed.
meaningful.
Point of order. It is 11 o'clock. We've got a budget to discuss.
I know, but there's a lot of people.
We have 1,000 emails from Daniel. We can have more tomorrow.
Some
Point of
people
order.
did not read them all. I want to ask one question. We understand that $600,000 is considered irresponsible by many people on Princeton Council. Would Princeton Council consider making a contribution to the as part of a public-private consortium to purchase the house? That is what I want you to consider within the next week or 10 days and not further out than that, because we cannot bust our asses as we have done without any sense of assurance from you that you want to help, that you want not to drive a wedge into this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right, now we're going to move on to our budget presentation.
Oh, boy.
Do you need a Diet Coke? We do have to introduce our budget now, so I would just respectfully ask if you still want to have a conversation, that we need to just be able to hear the presentation, that you take your conversations out into the hallway. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll just get started. It's late in the evening, so I want to start with the 2015 budget presentation. Before I get started, the first thing I'd like to do is thank all the people that worked very hard on this budget process. I want to thank Kathy Monzo.
Excuse me,
Can I just ask everybody who's still in a conversation,
excuse me, funded budget, please,
could people move out into the hallway? Thank you.
I want to also thank Sandy, the rest of the staff that helped put the budget together. Also, the great work of the Citizens Advisory Committee and the Council Advisory Committee. This is a process in which a lot of people were involved in putting together this budget, and I appreciate all their help and assistance during that process. What are we presenting to the Council this evening is a proposed budget of $60.9 million. And one thing that I think is important to note about this budget this year, it's really a new phase for Princeton. And it's really the first phase after the savings that we have achieved from consolidation, and where we now need to move into a phase of our budget where we're really managing and controlling costs moving forward and managing costs. And it's one of the themes that I think is going to be important moving forward, and I'll talk a little bit about this as I go through the presentation. The other thing, this proposed budget continues to maintain increased services and to be financially sustainable to the future. And again, that's one of the main themes of this budget process moving forward. And one of the things that we did look, whenever we made decisions, and I'm glad to see we made them looking forward into the future, what would be the impacts as we made any of the budget decisions or recommendations that you'll see in this budget. We also continue to manage our surplus and debt levels in accordance with established financial policies. In order to kind of achieve these objectives, this year we will have an increase in the rate of 1.6 cents. Just want to give you an overview of the budget process. It started with the preparation of a baseline budget by the departments. Then the departments also developed additional requests. Those are not, none of the requests in this budget based on where we are with the budget are presented in this budget. However, the departments that made those requests will come before council, and we'll talk about that a little later in the departmental presentations, and we'll present to you, and we'll present to you their proposal for additional funding for your review. The budget proposals were then reviewed by both staff, the Citizens Finance Committee, and the Council's Finance Committee to provide what we have today. The next steps in the budget will be, as I talked about before, the departmental budget presentations. We need to establish those dates before the public hearing, which will be April 27th. And again, as I talked at the beginning of this process about, we've come to the point where we have received the savings from consolidations, and this chart kind of illustrates that. As you can see, if you look at 2012, we had $63.2 million at a low of last year of $58 million, and then this year at $60 million. And this is where we have to now begin to manage, particularly looking forward, our budget, both from the expense side, and one of the things that we have not looked at, and we'll talk about a little later, is also our revenues. So I want to go through the current budget, and we're going to highlight the revenues in the budget this year, and again, $60.9 million in budget revenues, and just going to highlight some of the major changes I talked about before. One of the things we need to concentrate on is really managing our revenues. You can see there are a number of large decreases in revenue this year in some of our components. Receipt from delinquent taxes is down $200,000. We have interest and cost on taxes down $200,000.
Mark, could you page forward?
Oh, here, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then the sewer rents are down by $250,000. In addition, one thing that you'll see is an additional use of surplus. We are still managing our surplus. One thing that I'll talk about, although we're using $6.1 million in surplus, what we actually did, if you look at this, the extra money in here under surplus, we have found revenues that will replace that so that we will net impact our surplus moving forward. Thank you. And again, the chart here just illustrates where our revenues come from. And as you can see, tax dollars represents 52.4% of the budget.